It looks like there is a reason we're here, and it looks like there is more after our physical death, and it looks like they're all talking about love. They're all talking about making the most of our lives here. And so I thought, yes, this is the answer that I have been looking for.
Thank you, Ned, so much for being here today. I really wanted to have a chance to speak to you as the person who started what became the largest NDE group on Facebook in the world. But just to create a bit of context, I'd be curious to know what brought you to this topic of interest.
Well, and so in my story, I'm a scientist at heart. I questioned everything when I was a kid, when I was a teenager. And I guess you could call me perceptive. And when I saw how people were treating each other, how adults in the world, news, even news today, sometimes makes me question everything. And I think a lot of people relate. And, at that time when I was a teenager in high school, I didn't have close friends, and I had a really a dysfunctional family. I felt alone. I felt completely alone in the world. I felt I had my own insecurities about myself because I had an abusive childhood, an abusive father, And so I felt, I don't know why I'm here on earth. I don't see a reason. I think I might just see if I could leave early because it seems pointless here. I don't understand this. I felt like people were just oftentimes doing things that seemed silly. Like we create most of our problems. Are basically created by people, and if we just can heal that, we can have a much better and more intelligent and more advanced society on Earth. And I feel like we're slowly getting there. But because of my questioning everything, I needed a reason to live. And I looked at religions, looking at all of them, east side, west side, and I was looking if there had any core commonalities. And I've seen other people also do this search. And it was interesting because they did have some, but the traditions were very different. And then I looked at science, and I basically learned through biology and whatnot that it seems like we are a random accident, and these little variables and whatnot, numbers are just right, and everything it just kind of happened. But ultimately, we're an accident. There isn't a purpose. There isn't anyone else out in the universe. We're alone. It's a cold, dark place here. And so I felt if I leave the earth early, there isn't ultimately any consequence. Who cares? That's how I thought. And then I found out about mediums, and I talked to them. And then after some accurate information that the person couldn't have even found out or looked up online or anyone, and I never met them. They were in a whole different place, far away. But all those explorations made me think that there is something more. And then I came across near-death experiences. I think it was like on YouTube or something. And then I heard about Dr. Raymond Moody's book, Life After Life. And I read that, and it was a big eye-opener. And I felt it looks like there is a reason we're here, and it looks like there is more after our physical death, and it looks like they're all talking about love. They're all talking about making the most of our lives here. And so I thought, it almost was like a memory of like, yes, this is the answer that I have been looking for. It's almost like I needed to know that there is adults. It's almost like if humanity, even all of our adults here are often, let's say, children in a bigger picture, there are adults or beings which are even more intelligent and advanced. And I was like, feeling thankful that they are out there, and there are angels, and there are, and there is a higher power, and people will call it God or source, but there is an intelligence that is beyond us, and I found that fascinating. So the short answer is because I needed a reason to live, and once I found that, and I found IANDS, which is the International Association for Near-Death Studies, I felt like even though I have a software day job, I feel like my heart and passion is in getting the information out and telling people this is real, it's not hallucination, even as every year scientists will keep repeating the same articles like, oh, it's lack of oxygen, it's all this stuff, and they're ignoring the actual real researchers.
Thank you for sharing. I can so relate on a number of factors. I also looked at religions that transmit a lot of very, very, solid values that now it feels to me that the science of near-death studies is actually trying to demonstrate, which is the reason why perhaps you will help me popularize this term, which I've coined, to try and distinguish between those that come to terms with the afterlife through the traditional means of, let's say, religion, dogma, faith, creed, however you want to call it, and those that are just looking for the evidence. And I call the latter an afterlifer. It feels to me that this is, we can come up with a better name. I don't mind, but I felt the need to be able to distinguish the two, because when we talk about the afterlife, then people always like, oh, well, then you're religious. And I certainly don't feel that way, more like spiritual. And there's a huge difference between the two. Well, obviously, I do need to ask, were you afraid of death before this research, and how did that change?
At the time, before I found out about near-death experiences, I had a common fear of injury and of trauma. However, in high school and whatnot, I felt like it was pointless here. And so if I could have an instant death, I just imagined it would be like turning off the light and it's over. And so I didn't fear it at that time. And now, it's just amazing how many people who had afterlifers and people who've had these experiences are now my friends. And a lot of them will in private say that they're actually looking forward to it. And so I smile when I hear that, because it's like, oh, that's so interesting. And they say it's like a graduation, it's like a party. So, I was talking with a friend the other day, and she mentioned a funeral and whatnot, and I mentioned about how how it doesn't always have to be like a very dark or sad thing. Of course, it is sad, but if we can see it in a new light, and what's amazing is the evidence is all pointing to, it is a beautiful thing. It's not a bad thing. It's, it's a sad thing, but it's also a joyful thing. And I remember when my grandmother passed away a few years ago, the first thing I thought of, it was a feeling of peace and gratitude, because she had been, ill for a while and suffering, and knowing from all the afterlifers what was in store, I felt actually peace about it, and happy for her.
Wow. So here's probably a question for the skeptics out there. I'm assuming there's not one thing that made you change your mind from one day to another, but was it perhaps more like a gradual process of realization?
I think as soon as I came across the book Life After Life, and I think in the first pages of that or a similar book that I read, and it was describing the immense and powerful light and how loving it is, and immediately I felt, this is credible, and there are so many people who've had this, and so it didn't actually take long. I was like, okay, this is the lost information that I have been searching for, and I finally found it. And so I didn't have to be convinced over time. I mean, the scientist in me had definitely studied a lot of them, and so over the past 15 years now, I've met so many afterlifers, and I have friends who have had these experiences, and so it's almost like I have to sometimes remember how it feels to be a person who hasn't been in this a world of experiencers. Because for us, we kind of were like, oh yeah, we completely understand that there is an afterlife, and our loved ones are in spirit, and they often are watching over us. But for a lot of people, they aren't there yet, and they're still questioning, or they haven't heard about the evidence yet.
Yeah. I think what I came across in my research is that about 50% of us still adhere to let's say, the traditional model that suggests that, consciousness is the byproduct of cerebral activity. And one of the ideas that I promote is that the best investment I feel one could do in this lifetime is to try and find a way to solve this riddle of the afterlife, because the ideas that we have about death, and by association about the afterlife, is what somehow sets the foundations of then how we decide to live this life. So as you mentioned yourself, clearly if you feel that we're just random events, we're going to live a very different experience compared to someone that is aware that we are spirit trapped in this human body. We're here temporarily in this, let's say, physical reality, to experience duality. So yeah, obviously, I'm very excited that it feels to me that since the 70s, with the advent of the defibrillator and CPR, this is when I feel we perhaps started a new era where finally science is able to catch up with a lot of the things that, as I mentioned earlier, perhaps just religion was trying to transmit. So yeah, no, for me, this is a very exciting time to be alive. And do you feel that society is heading towards that way, that we're perhaps shifting between a materialistic society towards a more spiritual one, and that perhaps NDEs, I know there's many other phenomena, but for me, NDEs perhaps offer us the best map to try and understand who we really are and where we come from a bit better?
I love this question. It's because for me, and probably for everyone, it is the most important question now, because what you mentioned about how so many people don't believe in an afterlife, or if they believe in one, it's the religious kind, and a lot of those beliefs are very exclusive. They're like, well, if I'm in the right club, then I'm fine. Who cares about everyone else if they end up in hell? That's their problem. A lot of people believe this, and I bring this up because these are people in power, especially right now in the United States and whatnot. A lot, you might have heard of the term Christian nationalism. It has been trying to sort of take over the U.S. a while, and it's happening, in other countries now. A lot of disinformation on social media, and I'll say disinformation is basically lies. You have misinformation, which is like accidentally either leaving out some information or getting something wrong, and then there is disinformation, which is propaganda, which is telling lies, often playing on people's emotions to basically manipulate them. And I'll basically leave that out. But for anyone who's curious about this, all you have to do is ask yourself, who is promoting love, compassion, truth, and who is promoting division, hatred, anger? Of course, sometimes anger is important. If someone has hurt us, it's natural to have that anger. But oftentimes in this disinformation, people are using anger to manipulate and sway people. And so I say that as a prelude because your question about the people who truly understand or believe that there is an afterlife and there is accountability, justice, our actions matter, is perhaps, I feel like over time it should increase. And I think near-death experiences are helping to increase that. Even though I'm not religious, all religions have aspects of truth. And Jesus is basically quoted as saying, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And if you think about it, he was talking about people who were attacking, hurting other people, and not knowing that basically in the end, they are hurting themselves. And so all the people who are trying to attack other people, who think that the world is about domination or conquest, or power is basically the ultimate value, those people, I have learned in so many near-death experiences and mediums, will often have huge regret later on. And so I say that because it's important for us to learn from these. And when so many experiencers are saying, love is the answer, and yet I feel like what we have now is a rise of the opposite. And I think it's a temporary rise, but it's a good example, learning example of here's what the opposite of that looks like. And in fact, a lot of afterlifers and experiencers have directly said, if anyone hasn't heard about this, people in their near-death experiences, either in their experience or afterwards, are often given downloads about intuition or precognition, knowing future events. And a lot of them have said, at least in the United States, we are entering a time of more chaos and perhaps suffering. And it doesn't have to be forever, but perhaps it could be a learning experience. And I think in this year and next year, there could be a lot more suffering in the United States and maybe around the world because of not living as they teach us in love. You asked about, is it increasing? Is the awareness? I think it is. And in the times of greatest suffering in the world is when a lot of the most stubborn people, and I used to be one, finally question and say, all right, is there something, God, if you're there, I need help. And then in that time, they can finally have a shift. And so I think that will increase as well.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think the phoenix always needs to rise from the ashes. That there's no other way. So we went through a few centuries, if not millennia, of call them dark ages. Science has prevailed and it's done amazing progress. Don't get me wrong, but now we need to understand the consciousness and the fact that I can imagine a society that would integrate the notion of a life review, right? It seems to me that all events of separation, be wars, racism, even depression, as an act of separation from you towards the others, they're going to slowly dissolve. But we kind of need a little bit of a shake before we can actually get there. So I was wondering if there's anything that you'd recommend to the skeptics out there that they can do in order to start to come to terms with the notion of an afterlife?
If you're a skeptic out there and if you're open, I talk to a lot of people, and I've learned that we all are learning in our time. And at some point, there are people who might think they're open, but they aren't. But then you reach a point when you're like, I don't care about my previous beliefs. I want to know truth. And if it all evaluates and checks out, it's like a true scientist. You focus on the data and then you make your conclusions. But I definitely recommend some books and people. And so Dr. Bruce Greyson, he was one of the original founders of IANDS, and he has written a lot of books. And I think in 2023, he wrote the book After. I recommend it. I recently listened to it on Audible while driving. Yes. And it has so much information, especially for anyone new. He brings everything up to speed on what is the latest. And he talks about common misconceptions, even among academia. And Dr. Penny Sartori, Dr. Pim van Lommel in the Netherlands, many more I could mention. However, I will say, if you look at the IANDS website and also NDERF.org, they have a lot of consolidated information. And also, I'll add that you may have heard about Dr. Eben Alexander and his experience, which was, I think, in 2008, and many others. And knowing these people over a long time, as I have, or at least at the conferences, through their books and talks, if you're a skeptic, I would start questioning your fellow skeptics, because a lot of the times when the people are so vociferously against someone, there's often a lot of emotion in that. And a lot of people end up as a skeptic because of either being hurt by religion or seeing its flaws. And I'll say that, like you said, afterlifers are not the same as religious people. I'm not religious. You're not religious, and a lot of experiencers are not religious anymore. Even if they were religious when they've had their experience, that they realize a bigger picture. Like, religion is kind of our man-made ideas of trying to make sense of it. But when you're an afterlifer, you directly experience it. It's so much grander than even our human ideas understand.
Yeah, absolutely, which is a shame, because actually people often forget that religion comes from the Latin religere, which simply means to reconnect. So it has nothing to do with institution, with the church. This is all man-made, as you pointed out. So that's great. What would you say is the biggest lesson that you've learned from all this research?
In my research, which almost all of it, is basically informal or personal research, I have friends now who are mediums and who have had near-death experiences. And will say also that an interesting fact that most near-death experiencers, or I should say many of them, when they come back, they basically they come back with opened intuition. And science still doesn't want to acknowledge that there is something called intuition, but the more you dig into this, you see that there is something called intuition. And so things like hearing others' thoughts or knowing future events, it happens. I say that because having friends with these gifts and experiences is eye-opening, and you definitely learn how real it is. And I'll say there's a quote from Aldous Huxley, and it's something like, in all of my years of research, it's a little embarrassing to admit that the only thing I can conclude is to be kinder. And so it's almost like, also, even though I'm not religious, and I see that a lot of the religious texts have wisdom. And so in the Christian Bible, in the, I think it's 1 Corinthians 13, and it talks about how, if I don't have love, but I accomplish a lot, or I make a lot of noise, or people, I have a lot of power, I'm basically just a clanging gong that's annoying. It doesn't help anything. It doesn't help anyone. It's not appreciated. If I have love, that is basically what matters. And so some of us are more intellectuals, and we love data, analyzing things. Some of us are not like that at all, and we're simple. And all of us are important and needed. And the one thing which is important, regardless of who we are or where we are or our position in society, is to live that love more and to live that even in small ways. If it's hard, it's always better to take a small step if that's all we have. Our intention matters a lot, and a lot of experiencers in their life reviews say that what we did was important, and we often make mistakes. It's hard here, but if we have the right intentions and if we're trying, that's what matters. And so whoever you are as you hear this, if you want to make your life and the lives of everyone around you happier here and in the afterlife, just remember and live that love more. And when people are talking about wars or fighting or these people are bad, we must attack them or shun them, just remember, is that love or is that the opposite? And so if we just remember that, that is the key.
Well said. So I do ask all my guests, what's your idea of God these days?
It's fascinating because I've heard and I know even from the, let's say, Upanishads and Vedas from India and a lot of traditions, they say that you can't put a name or box on God. And so I have seen him, her, it, they express as personal beings for some people, and also like a vast impersonal force, and I've seen all of it. And so some people say, well, it's not a personal thing; it's just all there is. And some people say it's not all there is. It's a man with a beard who loves me. And I would say all of that, as long as it's because it's that intelligence, and it knows us. And it wants the best for us. And so if you can imagine a parent, a loving parent who even if you're an old person on earth at the moment, and you feel like I'm so mature and wise, if you think of yourself like a child, and that also helps us to not take ourselves as seriously and to kind of lighten up and appreciate each other, but that there is a parent who wants to help us, and we can always ask for help, even in our minds.
Why do you think God made us?
Good question. Well, I've heard from a lot of people, a lot of afterlifers, it's a number of things, but one of them is to have the experience, have the adventure, and the diversity. Like Earth is just a speck in the universe. It's amazing how tiny it is. It's amazing how far from here the moon is. If you talk about Venus or Mars, that's just like you're floating in nothingness for millions of miles. And so I say that because it's so vast, and a lot of experiencers and afterlifers say Earth isn't even all there is. Like a lot of us, without even knowing it, have probably lived other places, other dimensions, other planets. And so it's a diversity of experience. And also it's almost like each of us are little fragments or droplets. And we basically are learning to have that power responsibly. It's almost like free will is our gift, and we have to learn to use it wisely first, and then let's say our parent will give us more. And so on Earth we have like our little restrictions, because if we blow each other up with like nuclear bombs, it's showing that we aren't ready for a power yet. And so once we kind of mature collectively, and we kind of outlaw all of that, and we handle all the people who are still trying to hurt others, and we kind of contain them and let them heal, then we can basically grow and advance more.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's why you probably know yourself, Einstein, I think he sent a letter, was it Roosevelt at that time? And he specifically said, he warned him to say, well, be careful because you guys are playing with powers that humanity is not quite prepared to yield yet. So that's great. So one question I'd like to ask to those who have not had a near-death experience, so today's your turn. If you had an NDE yourself, obviously not something I'd wish to anyone because obviously it comes at a high cost, what would you ask the creator if you had a chance to ask anything?
That's a good question, and I need to think on that. And
Yeah, take
also,
your
I
time.
want to add,
Absolutely.
I think a lot of people in their experience, when they are there in that energy and power and are shown that everything will work out, it's almost like if you know that, a lot of the reasons for questions, it kind of falls away because you're like, well, all those people on earth who, all the family I had and who they're having a hard time, I know in the big picture everything will work out. And so you kind of, it's almost like hard to think of anything else. And so I'm personally curious about how to help speed up the evolvement of humanity to kind of have a happier path. But even that, a lot of that is dependent on everyone else because we all have a free will and people can't be forced into anything. And so I guess I would ask, is there anything I personally can do that can perhaps help influence some minds, like a post I write or a talk I give or action I take? And I'm also really curious about the history of my own soul. A lot of us have had many lifetimes and we don't even know it. You could be a fundamentalist Christian who is taught that there is no reincarnation, and yet your soul could have had other lives, in other cultures that you'd be shocked, like, oh my God, I didn't even know that. So I'm curious about like my own personal story and reason for being here in this lifetime, and how I could make the most of it. And actually, I'll end with this because I often, my prayer lately is just like, God, life is often confusing and I don't know which way to go. Help me make the most of my time here.
Well, it seems you're doing a pretty good job, to be honest, from where I stand. So hats off to you, sir. I'd like to end these conversations with the question: what's the meaning of life for you?
I think, and I've heard for so much, it's to experience, it's to feel it, all the emotions and whatnot. And I think it's also to connect our hearts and our actions and our daily presence more, because for so long I had spent my life on autopilot, on a hamster wheel, in jobs I wasn't happy in, and I'm sure so many people listening relate. And I think even in that is a valuable experience of contrast, because in contrast of that, I would say a meaning of life, which I feel strongly about now, is living in the moment, more present, and not in that the common mind limitations.
I love that. That's great. Well, is there any parting message you would like to leave us with before we end this call today?
Love is the answer. And when people in power are challenging that, when people are arguing over things, just remember that God loves all, no matter who. And, even the people who are causing issues, he loves them too. And that we're all accountable for our actions here. And so even the people who think that taking advantage of others is good or easy or whatnot, just remember that we're all accountable for what we do here, and our intentions matter. So remember, love is the answer.
I think, to be honest, nothing else needs to be added after this. So thank you so much, Ned. I've really enjoyed our chat. I think we covered a lot of very interesting topics. And let's see what the next decades have in store for us. All the best for now. Ciao, ciao.
All right, Danny.
Oh, hi there. Well, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video and want to support the IANDS community, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, and maybe share with the ones you love. If you're looking for another video to watch, I think this could be a very good one. New episodes out every Friday, and until then, enjoy the stream we all call life and live the love you wish to see in the world. Bye for now.